Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the only show on the internet that dives into old school D&D monster lore, ecology, plot hooks, and eventually converts them into 5th edition D&D. This week, we're talking about a pretty unique creature from the pages of 4th edition D&D. Now, we don't cover a ton of 4E monsters on this channel, but every time we do, you know it's gonna be something. So, what normal and totally cool monster from 4th edition are we gonna be talking about today? How about a demon that uses plots of murder and subterfuge to energetically align entire cities with the abyss and drag them into a never-ending nightmare hellscape for nothing but memes and meaningless clout among its peers? I'm sorry, it does what? The City Corruptor is a truly wild monster. Just to give you a heads up, this monster is into some pretty dark and violent shit, so if those are themes you're not comfortable with, this might not be the video for you. Now, like most demons, it has two names. The first is the one that mortals refer to it as, the second is the name that actually means something. Its cool nickname on the material plane is the City Corruptor, and its true name is the Evanissu. Its first and only appearance was in the 4th edition book, The Demonomicon, which was released in 2010. Like so many creatures from 4th edition, it only shows up once ever, and it has a handful of paragraphs all condensed into a single page. Say what you will about 4th edition, but for better or for worse, their monster entries were economical, because while there may not be a ton of text on this page, what we do have here is pretty lore dense, and it implies enough that if we're willing to do some digging, there's a dang cool monster in our midst. So what exactly is a City Corruptor? Well, on the outside, they appear as attractive humanoids.
They warned me Satan would be attractive.
The specific nature of their appearance varies pretty widely. They can seem to be a member of any humanoid race, and while one individual might present as masculine, another could easily be feminine. But none of this really matters, because while they may look like the most attractive person in the club, just beneath the surface, they are a horrible, demonic entity. Now, demons tend to be quite chaotic, and they are known for sowing discord and destruction. So, how do you think the City Corruptor does that? See if you can guess. If you guessed by corrupting cities, you'd be right. But what does that even mean? Corrupting cities. It's such a vague concept, so to understand this, we're gonna need to get into some D&D cosmological stuff. As many of you probably already know, in the primary D&D setting canon, there are all kinds of different planes of existence. A bunch of these planes have alignments to them, which implies that locations can bear an alignment on the law and chaos, good and evil spectrum. This alignment is usually determined, for the most part, by the creatures that live there, and in some cases by the essence of that plane. I'm only just now realizing how huge this topic actually is, but in order to simplify it, let's look at one specific instance that's related to what I'm getting at. For our purposes, the Abyss and the 9 Hells are a perfect example. On the spectrum of good and evil, they are both evil. On the spectrum of law and chaos, the 9 Hells is lawful, as it's populated by devils who follow a strict set of guidelines and unbreakable hierarchy. The Abyss, however, is chaotic, as it is an infinite number of layers which constantly shift and change, as do the innumerable horrors that lurk there. The idea here is that if a location such as a plane can bear an alignment, then so too can a much smaller location such as, say, a country, or even a city. And when a city's alignment becomes in tune with the chaotic evil nature of the Abyss, something very strange starts to happen. The barrier between the Abyss and this chaotic evil city starts to thin. Those who wish to summon demons might find it's much easier to do so in a place like that. And on the other side, the City Corruptor might find an opportunity to cross over of their own volition into the material plane, something which is not normally possible, but is made so by this alignment. And once the Evanissu manages to make that crossing, it gets to work. City Corruptors have a special ability that allows them to cross the threshold between the abyss and the material plane into a city that has fallen into the category of chaotic evil. It's ultimately up to the DM to decide what that actually looks like, but a city which has become chaotic evil in its alignment is not a place you're gonna want to be. This is going to be a city that is completely overrun with crime, and not cool crime like jaywalking or having a beer at 17. We're talking murder in the streets, a complete breakdown of just law enforcement, and absolute corruption at pretty much every level of government. Some, or maybe even all of this has to happen just by the will of the people who live in that city. I mean, every city's always gonna have outliers on either end of the good and evil spectrum, but when the majority of the people in that city have kind of fallen into this pattern, that's when we start to run into trouble. And only once the city has truly become a refuge for evil and chaos can the City Corruptor step in. However, once they do arrive on the scene, their primary objective is just to make things even worse. Like a virus, they will seek to destroy any redeemable qualities a city might have until all that's left is a grim reflection of the city's darkest moments before the demon's arrival. How do they do this? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first thing a City Corruptor is liable to do is get some minions. They're going to be seeking out other urban predators that one is likely to find in a city. This basically means forming a gang of murderers, assassins, and in some cases, politicians who will do just about anything for a gold piece. On the monster front, they might seek out creatures like were-rats or doppelgangers. Pretty much anyone who means to do harm to others and won't mind working for a demon is the order of the day. Once the minions have been gathered, the demon will orchestrate a campaign of carnage. The Corruptor wants to push the city's alignment as fast as it can towards chaotic evil. So this means killing lots of citizens, completely dismantling whatever government or laws may still exist, and just generally sowing fear and panic through the entire population. Its exact methods might vary from individual to individual, but the end goal is always pretty much the same. So, why does it do this? Well, the City Corruptor has another unique ability which allows it to drag entire cities into the abyss.
Looks like you're going to the Shadow Realm, Jimbo.
Its attempt to completely corrupt the nature of a city is sort of like terraforming. Once the city is so far gone that it matches the alignment of the abyss at the Evanissu's behest, the abyss will literally open up and swallow the city whole, dragging all its infrastructure and any unfortunate souls who happen to be living there along with it. Once the city has been brought into the abyss, it can never return, and the City Corruptor responsible for the city's downfall will be rewarded handsomely with praise from its fellow demons, and possibly a more tangible reward of power if it is serving a demon lord who can bestow such gifts. God, these guys are just the worst. Why are you like this? Anyways, so we know the who, the where, and the why, but we only know a little bit about the how. So let's take a look at this creature's actual abilities and how we might use them to build an encounter. The City Corruptor typically wants to avoid combat. After all, that's what it has minions for. The creature itself is going to take great lengths to be as inaccessible as it can to any would-be heroes that seek to take it down. However, these things inevitably happen from time to time, and if forced to fight, the City Corruptor is no slouch. Its primary means of attack comes in the form of a bone dagger, which does a decent amount of damage. It also forces a saving throw to avoid a bleeding effect that causes necrotic damage over time, but this is only really going to be how the demon spends its turn if backed into a corner. The two actions that really set this creature apart are called Innocent Glance and False Alliance. Innocent Glance is an interesting move that forces a target that can see and be seen by the City Corruptor to make a dreaded charisma save. On a failure, the target is charmed for a turn and has to move as close as possible towards the demon. This is a great tool for drawing pesky ranged attackers and spellcasters into melee range so that the demon or its allies can easily strike a normally difficult target. False Alliance is also a charm ability, except it targets all creatures within 10 feet. Once again, the target gets a saving throw, and the effect only lasts one turn, but this ability is straight up nasty. While charmed in this way, each creature has to make a melee attack against a creature of the Evanissu's choice on their turn, which means not only is their next action wasted, it might be doing a pile of damage to an ally depending on circumstance. This ability is definitely situational, but when it does go off in major fashion, it is going to suck. The City Corruptor also has a few spells on deck that revolve around beguiling its enemies and causing damage, such as friends and hideous laughter. And that's pretty much it as far as actions and spells go, and it should give you a decent idea of how this creature's going to fight. But the true icing on the demonic cake is its two traits. The first trait is called Slippery, and this one is dedicated to all the Polearm Master Sentinel feat users out there. That's right, this creature doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity. I guess that makes it pretty, well, slippery. Secondly, it has a trait called Fade into Darkness, which is simple but effective. When the demon's HP drops to half of its maximum value for the first time in a 24-hour period, as a reaction, it can cast invisibility on itself. If it wants to stay and fight, it can, but this essentially gives the creature a moment to fade into obscurity and slip away. By the time a group of adventurers takes on this guy, they'll likely have ways to deal with invisibility, but if it catches them off guard, your villain has a window to get out. Personally, I love it when a villain has an opportunity to escape an encounter or the players are forced to flee, because both the players and the villain are then given time to prepare for the next encounter. Sure, the next time the players face off against the City Corruptor, they'll have a much better idea of its capabilities and they will definitely be way more prepared to take it down. But that cuts both ways, and the Evanissu will also have had time to analyze the players and see what kind of abilities they have up their collective sleeves and maybe set a trap or two. And what kind of traps might they set and how might they prepare? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's take a look at what we can actually do with this creature and go over a few. This monster might seem like it has a pretty clear-cut built-in story to be told, and we love that, but there are a few ways that we can play around with the demon's motives to make it unique. Something I do want to point out just immediately is you can absolutely use this creature to just rip off the entire plot of The Dark Knight.
I'm the Joker, baby!
I mean, think of it. Gotham City in that movie is presented as a city full of corruption and on the decline, and the Joker is supposed to be this fundamentally flawed agent of chaos who wants to show everyone how broken their society really is. So the City Corruptor is kind of doing the same thing, but with the much more direct goal of literally dragging a city into the abyss, and Batman isn't here to do anything about it, which I guess is where the players will step in. If you really like the idea of a city being dragged into the abyss and this creature, you could also build a much larger campaign around it in 3 acts. Act 1 would be some small-time adventurer stuff taking place in a fairly corrupt city. Maybe the players have taken it upon themselves to try and save their town by uprooting the evil at play. At first, they might just think it's your typical mundane kind of evil, so they start investigating the criminal underworld in some sort of attempt to maybe take down the key players or something like that. But as they poke and prod around, they slowly unravel that there is actually a cult to one of the major demon lords, probably Grazit, and this cult is knowingly influencing the city to try and draw the place into the abyss. So the first act should end with this horrible realization and the understanding that it's too late to stop this City Corruptor from passing through to their side of the fence. And with the arrival of the City Corruptor, Act 2 will be all about the party fighting back against the City Corruptor's cultists and any of the minions that it's been able to amass. Depending on how this all plays out, it might end with the party triumphant over the demon. But if it goes poorly, the campaign doesn't have to end in failure necessarily. Perhaps things don't work out and the city is dragged into the abyss with the party inside its walls. If that happens, the players will need to escape the abyss along with any survivors they want to save, and that could be a third and final act to this story in and of itself. I also want to take a moment to talk about what happens on the material plane when an entire city is just dragged into the abyss. We're not really given much information from the original monster entry about this, but I've added a bit of lore to the monster stat block that you can choose to ignore if you don't like it. To me, it makes sense that such a cataclysmic event would leave behind some kind of mark on the material plane. A sort of scar on the landscape, if you will. In my additional lore for this monster, I refer to these places as dark spots. A dark spot is, of course, a place on the material plane where there was once a city, But that city has been taken to the abyss and is now sort of just a dead zone. Nothing will grow there, the sun always seems to be somewhat shaded, and the veil between reality and the abyss is still very thin. I like this because it can give you a really cool location for the party to just stumble upon. Maybe they were actively headed towards the city to try and save it, but they didn't make it in time, and now this is all that's left. But then of course this begs the question, what else might they find there? If, say, someone wanted to get into casual demon summoning, setting up camp on a dark spot would be the ideal situation for them. So maybe your story doesn't even involve the Evanissu, but rather it involves the party trying to take down a powerful demon summoner who has erected an obsidian tower atop a cursed land that was once the location of a great city said to have been whisked away along with its entire population overnight. I think that's cool as hell, and if you also think that, I encourage you to flesh out this idea and expand upon it. What do you think an adventure in a place like that might look like? In any case, if you do want to use this monster in your D&D campaign, look no further than the description down below. You will find a Google document which contains all the stats and lore and everything else that you will need to successfully run this creature at your table. And if you are one of my lovely patrons, you will of course find the Dungeon Dad Patreon exclusive monster stat block with the artwork and the lore and all that stuff laid out in a beautiful PDF format for you to use over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, which is also linked in the description down below. And speaking of patrons, it is time for Patron of the Week. This week's randomly selected patron is Lupin Furbane. Thank you so much for the support, and I hope last week's episode was of great use to you. And thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Thank you for being here every week so we can talk about cool monsters all the time. It means a lot to me, so thanks for watching my stuff. If you do have a monster from a previous version of D&D or another tabletop game that you would like to see show up on the channel and convert it into 5th edition, definitely leave a comment and let me know, or get at me on Discord. We have a monster suggestions channel over there where you can suggest monsters and they will be added to the list. Also, while we're talking about it, huge shout out to the Discord community overall just for being awesome. We recently have become partnered on Discord, which means that we get a bunch of fancy extra new features and a cool custom vanity URL and banner and all that stuff. So now you don't have to put in a whole mess of code or get an invite from somebody. You can just go to discord.gg/dungeondad and it'll take you right there. This basically, more than anything, is just a big milestone to show how much our community has grown. And yeah, thank you guys so much for being a part of it. The conversations that happen there every day genuinely warm my heart. So thank you guys so much for being part of this awesome community, and hopefully this is just the beginning. Anyways, that's pretty much all I've got for you this week, so I'll see you in the next one. Until then.